What if I told you that one man, without writing a single book, without leading an army, and without ruling a kingdom, changed the course of human history forever? His name was Socrates, and though he lived over 2,400 years ago, his ideas still shape the way we think, argue, and understand the world today. But here's the paradox. Socrates himself claimed to know nothing at all. This is the story of a man who spent his life questioning everything. So much so that the city of Athens condemned him to death for it. A man who walked the streets, challenging powerful men, exposing ignorance, and urging people to think for themselves. He was loved, he was hated, but most importantly, he was remembered. And in the end, his death became more powerful than his life. In this video, we'll dive deep into the world of Socrates, his philosophy, his methods, his trial, and the incredible legacy he left behind. Was he truly wise, or was he just a troublemaker? Why did his own city turn against him? And what can we, over 2 millennia later, learn from his story? Prepare for a journey into the mind of Socrates, the man who knew too much. You might be wondering, why should we care about an ancient philosopher? After all, Socrates lived in a time before modern science, and before most of the technology we rely on today. What could a man from 5th century BCE Athens possibly teach us? The answer is simple. The way we think today is built on the foundations that Socrates laid. Every time you ask, why? Instead of just accepting an answer, you're thinking like Socrates. Every time you engage in a deep discussion, challenging ideas instead of just agreeing blindly, you're applying the Socratic method. Every time you seek truth, question authority, or search for meaning beyond material success, you're following in his footsteps. His ideas influenced Plato, who then influenced Aristotle, who in turn shaped much of Western philosophy. From politics to ethics, from education to law, Socrates' ideas ripple through history. But his impact wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. His story is one of courage, defiance, and an unshakable commitment to truth, even in the face of death. And that is why, 2,400 years later, we are still talking about him. Socrates was born around 470 BCE in Athens, Greece. He lived through some of the most turbulent times in Athenian history: wars, political upheaval, and the rise and fall of democracy. He wasn't a rich aristocrat or a powerful politician. In fact, he lived a humble, almost ragged life, wandering the streets, engaging in debates, and making people uncomfortable with his relentless questioning. Unlike other philosophers of his time, Socrates never wrote anything down. Everything we know about him comes from his students, mainly Plato and Xenophon, as well as from his critic, the playwright Aristophanes, who mocked him in comedies. His method was simple yet powerful. He would ask people questions, deep, probing questions that exposed their ignorance. His goal was to make people think, to force them to examine their beliefs and seek real wisdom. His belief was that the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. But not everyone appreciated his approach. His constant questioning made him many enemies, especially among the powerful and the elite. Eventually, his search for truth led him to a trial that would become one of the most famous court cases in history. Socrates' story takes a dramatic turn when, in 399 BCE, he was put on trial by his fellow Athenians. The charges? Impiety, disrespecting the gods, and corrupting the youth. But the real reason behind his trial was something deeper. His ideas were dangerous to those in power. Despite being given a chance to escape execution, Socrates refused. He accepted his fate, choosing to drink poison rather than betray his principles. His last words, spoken as the poison took effect, were both mysterious and thought-provoking. "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it." What did he mean? Why did he choose death over exile? And how did his ideas survive long after his execution? We'll explore every aspect of Socrates' life, ideas, and legacy. From his early days as a soldier to his legendary debates, from his trial to his final moments, we will uncover the truth about the man who knew too much. Stay with me as we journey into the life and mind of Socrates. To understand Socrates, we must first understand the world he lived in. Athens in the 5th century BCE was a city unlike any other. It was a place of intellectual brilliance, political revolution, and cultural dominance. But it was also a place of contradictions, a society that prided itself on democracy, but was quick to silence those who questioned it. This was the world of Socrates. During Socrates' lifetime, Athens was at its peak. It was the beating heart of Greek civilization, known for its art, literature, philosophy, and politics. This was the golden age of Athens, a period when the city flourished under the leadership of Pericles. The Parthenon was being built, a temple to the goddess Athena, symbolizing the city's wealth and power. Theaters were filled with the works of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, playwrights whose dramas and comedies are still performed today. Philosophy was beginning to emerge as a serious discipline, with thinkers like Anaxagoras and Protagoras challenging traditional beliefs. At the same time, Athens was at the center of a vast naval empire, controlling trade routes and collecting tributes from other city-states. The city was rich, powerful, and proud of its democracy, a system in which citizens, not kings or tyrants, held power. But beneath this glory, there were tensions that would eventually bring Athens to its knees. One of the most remarkable aspects of Athens was its democratic system. Unlike most civilizations of the time, Athens allowed its male citizens to participate in government. They could vote, propose laws, and even serve in public office. This was the birthplace of democracy. But here's the contradiction. Athenian democracy was far from perfect. 1. Only a small fraction of the population had political rights. Women, slaves, and non-citizens had no say in government. Even among free men, only about 30,000 citizens out of a total population of over 250,000 could participate. 2. It was a direct democracy, but also unstable. Laws could be changed overnight by a simple majority vote. Politicians could be easily swayed by popular opinion, leading to emotional and irrational decisions. 3. It could be ruthless. Athens prided itself on free speech, yet it exiled or executed those who challenged the status quo, a fate Socrates would later suffer. Athenian citizens could ostracize any political figure they deemed too powerful, forcing them into exile for 10 years. Socrates saw these flaws and was deeply critical of democracy. He believed that most people were unfit to govern, arguing that just because a majority votes for something doesn't mean it's wise or just. His opposition to democracy would later be one of the reasons he was put on trial. Alongside democracy, another intellectual movement was growing in Athens, the Sophists. These were traveling teachers who claimed to have the skills to teach people how to win arguments, persuade crowds, and succeed in politics. Sophists taught rhetoric, the art of persuasion, and they were masters of speech, capable of making weak arguments appear strong. They charged high fees for their lessons, promising young men success in Athenian politics. But to Socrates, the Sophists were frauds. They didn't seek truth, they sought victory in debate. They didn't care about wisdom, they cared about power and wealth. They taught their students that truth was relative, that there was no absolute right or wrong, only what was useful. Socrates opposed this way of thinking. He believed that truth and virtue mattered more than persuasion and success. Unlike the Sophists, Socrates never charged money for his teachings, claiming that true wisdom should be free to all. This put him at odds with the most powerful men in Athens, leaders, politicians, and intellectuals who had benefited from the Sophist teachings. During Socrates' lifetime, Athens was not only the cultural center of Greece, but also a military power. However, its dominance was challenged by Sparta, its longtime rival. In 431 BCE, war broke out between Athens and Sparta, the Peloponnesian War. This brutal conflict lasted for 27 years, devastating Athens and weakening its democracy. The war brought famine, disease, and economic collapse. The Athenian government became increasingly unstable, leading to violent power struggles. Many Athenians lost faith in democracy as leaders made reckless decisions that led to defeat. Socrates lived through this chaos and fought in the war as a soldier. He witnessed firsthand how corrupt, incompetent politicians led Athens to ruin. His criticisms of democracy became even sharper. When Athens finally surrendered to Sparta in 404 BCE, the city was left humiliated. A new government, backed by Sparta, took over, known as the 30 Tyrants. These rulers were cruel and executed many Athenians, including some of Socrates' students. But when democracy was restored in 403 BCE, the wounds of war and betrayal still lingered. Many Athenians wanted to find a scapegoat for their suffering, and they would soon turn their anger towards Socrates. Socrates was shaped by war, political instability, and the rise of intellectual movements like the Sophists. He saw the flaws of democracy, the emptiness of rhetorical tricks, and the consequences of poor leadership. Rather than seeking power or wealth, Socrates devoted his life to questioning everything. He wanted to understand, what makes a person truly wise? What is the best way to live? Can a democracy truly work if people don't seek knowledge? These questions would lead him into deep conflicts with the Athenian elite, and eventually into a courtroom where his own city would decide his fate. In the next section, we will explore who Socrates was as a person, his life, his beliefs, and the strange ways in which he lived. Socrates was a man unlike any other in Athens. He did not write books, hold public office, or claim to be wise. Yet, he became one of the most influential figures in history. His life was a paradox. He was admired and ridiculed, respected and condemned, remembered as both a genius and a threat. Socrates was born in 470 BCE in Athens to a modest family. His father, Sophroniskis, was a stonemason, and his mother, Phaenarete, was a midwife. Unlike the aristocrats and wealthy politicians of Athens, Socrates came from humble beginnings. He learned his father's trade and likely worked as a stonecutter in his youth. He served as a soldier in the Peloponnesian War, proving himself to be courageous in battle. He never pursued wealth or power, living a simple and almost ascetic life. Socrates married a woman named Xanthippe, who is often described as bad-tempered. However, Socrates himself was difficult to live with. He was poor, eccentric, and spent most of his time wandering the city questioning people. Socrates did not look like the ideal Greek hero. In a society that valued physical beauty, he was considered ugly. He had a broad nose, thick lips, and bulging eyes. He was short and stocky, with a strong build. He rarely bathed, walked barefoot, and wore the same simple clothes every day. Despite his appearance, Socrates had a powerful presence. His deep voice, intense gaze, and unshakable confidence made people take him seriously. He cared little for material wealth, fine clothing, or luxury. He believed that the soul was more important than the body. Socrates never taught in the way other philosophers did. He did not give lectures or write books. Instead, he asked relentless questions, engaging people in dialogues that exposed their ignorance. His method of questioning, later called the Socratic method, worked like this. 1. He would approach someone who claimed to know something, like a politician, poet, or craftsman. 2. He would ask them a simple question about their knowledge. For example, what is justice? Or what is courage? 3. As they answered, he would keep asking deeper questions, exposing contradictions in their reasoning. 4. Eventually, they would realize that they didn't actually know what they thought they knew. This method was both brilliant and annoying. Socrates did not claim to be wise himself, but he showed that many respected people were not as wise as they believed. This made him famous and made powerful people hate him. One of the most famous stories about Socrates comes from the Oracle of Delphi. A friend of Socrates visited the oracle and asked, "Who is the wisest man in Athens?" The oracle replied, "No one is wiser than Socrates." When Socrates heard this, he was confused. He did not consider himself wise. So, he began questioning the politicians, poets, and craftsmen of Athens, testing their wisdom. What he found was shocking. Politicians claimed to know about justice, but could not explain it logically. Poets wrote beautiful words, but could not explain their meanings. Craftsmen were skilled in their trade, but believed they were wise in everything. Socrates concluded that most people think they are wise, but they are not. The only difference between him and others was that he admitted his ignorance. Thus, Socrates famously said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing." This belief drove his entire philosophy. He was always searching for truth, questioning assumptions, and encouraging others to do the same. Socrates described himself as a gadfly, a small insect that constantly bites and annoys a horse. Athens was the horse, and he was the gadfly, stinging the city with difficult questions to keep it awake. He would question powerful leaders, exposing their ignorance, challenge popular beliefs, making people uncomfortable, criticize democracy, arguing that most people were not fit to govern. Socrates believed that a just and wise society must be based on reason, not popularity. But this made him many enemies. Some Athenians admired him for his sharp mind and courage. Others hated him for embarrassing them in public. Eventually, this would lead to his trial. Socrates had several core beliefs that guided his life. 1. The unexamined life is not worth living. He believed that people should constantly question their own beliefs and seek self-improvement. 2. Virtue is the highest good. Wealth, power, and fame were meaningless without moral character. 3. No one does evil knowingly. If people do wrong, it's because they are ignorant of what is truly good. 4. Philosophy is a way of life, not just intellectual talk. He lived according to his principles, refusing to compromise, even when facing death. While Socrates was loved by many, he also had powerful enemies. He criticized democracy, mocked Athenian leaders, and exposed the ignorance of influential figures. This made him a target. By the time he was 70 years old, Athens had suffered war, defeat, and political chaos. The city was looking for someone to blame for its troubles, and Socrates, with his radical ideas, became the perfect scapegoat. In 399 BCE, Socrates was put on trial for 1. Corrupting the youth because young men followed him and questioned authority. 2. Not believing in the gods of Athens, since he often spoke of a mysterious divine voice that guided him. The trial of Socrates would become one of the most famous trials in history. It was not just about him. It was about free speech, philosophy, and the power of the state to silence dissenting voices. In the next section, we will dive into the trial of Socrates, a moment that would change history forever. The trial of Socrates is one of the most famous trials in history, raising questions about free speech, philosophy, and the power of the state. To fully understand the details of Socrates' trial, check out our dedicated video on this topic available on our channel. Socrates' unwavering commitment to questioning and critical thinking laid the foundation for Western philosophy. His teachings continue to inspire us to seek wisdom and challenge assumptions. If you found this exploration of Socrates' life and legacy insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. What lessons from Socrates' philosophy resonate with you today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.